Morning and welcome to the daily cyber briefing for Wednesday, the 13th of November. I'm Stephen Ridgway. It's Patch Tuesday, so 89 CVE listed security flaws have been patched by Microsoft. Two are under active attack. So the two that are being currently exploited are CVE 2024 49039, which is a privilege escalation vulnerability in Windows Task Scheduler. It's got a CVSS rating of 8.8, and there are exploits out there, and those exploits are being used. Also, CVE 2024 43451, which is an issue in NTLM code. It's a spoofing flaw that can be used to obtain a victim's NTLM v2 hash, which allows, of course, for account impersonation and account takeover. So those two, that's actually only got a CVSS score of 6.5. However, the reason I think it's quite interesting is that it requires absolutely minimal interaction with the victim. Let me see. Actions like selecting, as in single clicking, or inspecting, right clicking, a malicious file can trigger this exploit and exploit this vulnerability. Excuse me. Now that's a bit of an interesting one, because normally, the advice we give people is, so long as you don't open a file, you should be okay. But the act of clicking on it exploits this. It takes me back probably 20 years to a rather good fun file download vulnerability that there was in Internet Explorer at the time, whereby simply by clicking on anything, in fact, in a web browser in Internet Explorer, could result in the download and execution of malware from an external site. So these things have been these single click type vulnerabilities are not totally new, but they are more unusual. And we would not normally teach users that just clicking on a file, not even opening it, or right-clicking it to inspect it, would be a dangerous thing to do. I mean, quite often, and actually I think there's probably a whole load of security professionals, myself included, who would be not adverse to right-clicking things to inspect them, just to look at not things that you think really are malicious, but things you look at and go, oh, what is this? Right-click, get info kind of thing. So watch out. There are various other vulnerabilities. Users of Azure Cycle Cloud, be aware of CVE 2024 43602, which has got a CVSS score of 9.9, allowing for a rogue user to send a request to modify the configuration of a Cycle Cloud cluster and exploit the issue to gain root privileges. Not being exploited at the moment. However, the consequence of exploit, of course, is pretty much complete takeover. There is a vulnerability in .NET Visual Studio, CVE 2024 43498, with a CVSS score of 9.8. It's triggered by loading specially crafted files into a vulnerable desktop app. And another high severity vulnerability is CVE 2024-43639, CVSS score of 9.8, which is a cryptographic vulnerability in Windows Kerberos. Difficult to exploit, but pretty severe if exploited, hence the score. Various other vulnerabilities that have been patched, not just by Microsoft, but by other people as well. So Citrix has come out with fixes for NetScaler ADC and NetScaler Gateway. For example, AMD has released 8 security patches. Intel released 47 patches across many of its processors. Adobe has released a patch bundle with nearly 50 fixes in it, covering Photoshop and Variant Illustrator and all sorts of other Adobe products. So, definitely worth the usual reminder of get on with it when it comes to patching. There's a lot to do this month. Should keep you busy. As always, I err on the side of patch and be damned, because at least if something breaks, I say this for most organisations, if you're running life support systems in an operating theatre, probably patch and be damned is not the right approach. However, for the vast majority of organisations, keeping on top of patching is much better than not keeping on top of patching, even though there are potentially tens, possibly even hundreds of patches that may need to be pushed out across the estate. So multiple servers across the estate. If you leave it too long, you can end up with patches stacking up. Patching patches can be, the whole dependency thing gets into a right mess, and it's much harder to work out what's broken something if it's broken. Whereas at least if you've only got a list of, let's say, 89 Microsoft patches, you can probably eliminate 80% of those as being the cause of any particular problem very quickly, because they're not in the component that's failed, and then you're left with a small number of 2 or 3 patches that you need to investigate if something has gone wrong. So, stand-up testing, yes. Don't roll out something that will flatten your environment. But equally, don't hold off when you could be making yourself secure, because the time, as we've spoken about a lot recently, the time between vulnerability disclosure and exploit is very small these days. So the time spent proving that the patch won't introduce issues, which is relatively rare anyway, may well leave you open to. In fact, it does leave a window of opportunity open for attackers. I've got a dry throat this morning. Vault Typhoon is back. So for all of you that thought that the FBI shutting down the botnet, was it earlier this year? No, yeah, I think it was earlier this year. If you thought that was the end of it, you're wrong. As predicted at the time, they are back, and this is always going to be the case. Law enforcement is playing whack-a-mole with these sorts of organisations. Vault Typhoon is well funded and well supported by the Chinese government. Simply eliminating or destroying an existing botnet is a setback, but they'll just start building another one, so they won't go away. They are, however, back. So the focus of this particular group remains on compromising old Cisco routers and using those to break into critical infrastructure, especially in the US. And our experience is that critical national infrastructure in the US um, doesn't get the focus or funding that for cyber security or information security that would be common in a European nation, which may be something to do with the psychology of threats. US rarely faces direct threats, so it's kind of not in the DNA, whereas European countries have been busily invading each other and threatening each other, or as is, even currently, there is in fact currently a war going on in Europe right now, which kind of brings home the mentality of the stuff. So, yeah, be aware if you are running old Cisco routers, Vault Typhoon's back, and they're out to get you. And then finally, from me, you may remember that a National Guardsman was caught showing off sensitive documents on Discord, showing off to his mates on Discord. Well, he's got 15 years in jail for doing that. So, Jack, and I think it's pronounced Teixeira? Yeah, Portuguese surname, Brazilian surname possibly, has been sentenced now. Why am I bringing this up? Well, he was working in the cyber defense, the intelligence wing, and the cyber defense part of the intelligence wing of operations at a National Guard airbase in the US, in Massachusetts. You would have thought that if he was particularly stupid, vetting would have caught him. It didn't. Also, the documents that he was stealing and then using to show off with were above his security clearance. That's a throwaway comment in the article, but I think there's a very interesting question here. How come in such a well-organized hierarchical security structure as the US military, or any military, how come somebody needs to be asking the question, how come he could actually access those documents if they were only cleared for people with higher clearance than his? He shouldn't have been able to get to them, I think, would be a good starting point. Well, I'm sure these questions are being asked inside. Anyway, so watch out for insider threat. It isn't necessarily even malicious. It's not all. It's not that all insider threat is down to people who've been turned by by our nation's state enemies and are actually spying and looking to bring down the government. It can just be people nicking stuff in order to show off to their mates how really cool they are. So yeah, keep an eye out for internal threat. Right, okay, that's enough from me for this morning. Thanks for tuning in, and I will speak to you all again tomorrow.